My name is Gerardo Herrera, Communication Director of Rismatics, and I'm here with Brett King at the Digital Banking and Financial Technologies Forum in Mexico City. Mr. King, it's such a pleasure to be here. It's not the first time that you are here in an event organized by Rismatics, I remember.
Exactly, yeah. No, it's my third or fourth time with you guys.
Yeah, more or less, something like that. We have been talking about emerging and future trends in banking for the last 4 years, before the pandemic, after pandemic. And I guess my first question is precisely this one. We met and we started talking about all these trends before the pandemic. The great lockdown came in 2020 and digitization erupted, exploded. Right. And yet we are back in a face-to-face event because people wanted the
Sure.
real life, the real world. What is the balance after the pandemic of these advances?
Well, if you look at where digitization works best, it's where there's friction that can be removed and made more efficient. Right? Mm-hmm. Coming to an event like this, it's not about the friction, it's about the experience. It's an experiential requirement. So this is where a lot of bankers get this wrong, is going to a bank is not an experience. You want it to happen as quickly and as efficiently as possible. If you're trying to get access to credit and the bank says, well, you have to come down and sign pieces of paper and do all this, versus a fintech that says, sure, you've got it, here it is on your phone, bang, 30 seconds. You know, you're not wanting to have an experience in a bank to get that friction. Friction is against a positive experience. So this is where we see really the balance of the work that's been doing with technology to optimize and make things more efficient versus the human factor, which we look for experientially. So if you look at high levels of automation in the future, things like restaurant experiences, tourism experiences, living life as a digital nomad, where you choose to get medical treatments done and things like this. These are experience driven. And so the human factor will still be a very strong differentiator. But in a banking scenario, if you say, well, you have to see a human and sign a piece of paper, from an experience perspective, that's a negative experience because it introduces friction, where today we realize that's no longer necessary. So if you look in the United States, 60-70% of all bank accounts are open digitally now. This is an example of this trend happening in the banking space.
Okay, I guess my next question is, we hear about crypto, that we'll talk in a minute, metaverse, ChatGPT, etc. But at the same time, for example, as we speak, one of the success cases of blockchain implementation, Maersk, the shipping company, and IBM, that started in 2016, is being dismantled because it didn't work. Are all these new technologies mature enough? Or are we going to be hearing in a few years, leaping into the future, of many of these experiences being backed down?
Look, if you look at Google Glass from a few years ago, Google Glass, people said it's a failure. Now we are seeing Meta and Apple pouring billions of dollars into smart glasses technology. We know that augmented reality technology is going to be a huge personal electronics direction coming over the next few years because of just purely the amount of money that's being poured into these technologies. When the first computers came about, not everyone could use them. You had to have a very strong technology competency just to be able to use a computer. And the head of IBM famously said, there was a market for maybe a dozen computers in the world. And today everyone has a computer. If it's a smartphone or whatever. So you do have these ebbs and flows, but technology goes only in one direction. And you're looking at 300 years of technology disruption. we can tell you that technology always wins. It never backs down. We have no evidence ever of technology reversing in respect of taking a more traditional approach. There's just no evidence of that historically. You do have a testing phase or an experimental phase of various technologies, and sometimes one type of technology doesn't work and another type of technology will replace it. For example, like VHS versus beta, or 8-track and then CD-ROMs and now streaming music. But that trend in terms of technology adoption is one that is now 300 years strong. And so unless you are going to change the philosophy of humanity itself, technology is always going to be disruptive.
Okay. Now, if there is something that we know about technology, just as much as that it's going to be disruptive, is that it destroys jobs, and in many technological changes creates jobs. But nowadays, I seem to perceive an impression that definitely this latest technological shift is going to destroy jobs. It's not as yet very clear if it's going to create as many jobs as it destroys. What is your opinion on this?
Well, this is true of the internet, for example. The internet, for every job that it destroyed, it created 2 new jobs approximately. This is the McKinsey research showed. And so people are saying this about artificial intelligence. Yes, it'll destroy jobs, but it'll also create new jobs. Right now, one of the hot new jobs is, for example, being a prompt writer for generative pre-transformer algorithms like ChatGPT and DALL-E and Midjourney and so forth. So people that can learn to operate these AIs are having an advantage. Similar to what we saw with social media. You have social media influencers and you have YouTube influencers and things like this. These are new jobs that were created by these technologies. But AI has the ability in the future, particularly something like artificial general intelligence, which is the aim of this research, to disrupt many jobs simultaneously. Because with AI, we'll be able to teach it to do any job a human can do conceivably. And we used to think that the difference between the machine and humans would be creativity. But as we can see with ChatGPT and these generative AI in the art worlds, for example, AI can be creative if you program it in the right way or if you seed it with the right data. So the areas where we thought we'd be able to protect jobs aren't necessarily, that's not necessarily the case. Overall, AI is going to disconnect human labor from large portions of the economy. That's a problem for wealth distribution, because the only way we know how to distribute wealth right now is paying you a salary or a wage. So if you can't work because AI has disrupted your employment, what do? Let's take truck drivers in the United States. Approximately 5 million truck drivers, 2 million truck drivers that do the transcontinental, from the East Coast to the West Coast as their regular job. Autonomous vehicles will disrupt this employment. Now you could say, well, they could be retrained as programmers, for example. Let's be realistic. Not every truck driver is going to be able to be retrained as a computer programmer or an AI specialist. Maybe 5%, maybe 10% at the outside. What happens to the other 90% of people disrupted by these technologies? Well, you either have to find them a new career, or you have to come up with something like universal basic income or some sort of social safety net for them. And most entrepreneurs talk about UBI as an inevitability because they believe that the market will reward us getting rid of humans in the workforce. And AI, the intent of AI, is to eliminate humans from the workforce. And it has always been the case. So highly automated societies of the 2050s will not have people working in production. They'll be working in jobs aligned with artificial intelligence and aligned with the experiential side of humanity, and more creating our own businesses, more community aspects. But the biggest growth area is not going to be in AI developed jobs, the biggest growth area will be in climate jobs in the 2040s and 2050s. So we'll have plenty of jobs for people, but there'll be very different jobs from what we have today. And so the point is, it's going to be disruptive regardless of whether or not it creates more jobs or not. There's just going to be a lot of change, a lot of disruption happening in a short period.
Okay, now let's talk about another concern, a very important concern. A few years ago, Target Superstore, Target Marketplaces, sent some coupons for baby clothes and pregnancy care to an underage girl. The father of this girl went to the store, to the closest store, and yelled at the store manager, who didn't have an idea of what the guy was talking about, because this was sent in an automated process by the Target algorithm that had predicted that the girl was pregnant. Turned out to be that the girl was pregnant. And the father found out thanks to these coupons sent by this AI algorithm from a pharmacy in a supermarket. I'm sure the father wasn't very happy, because we know that he was yelling, although he was very apologetic when he eventually found out that it was true. We don't know what the reaction of the underage girl was, but I don't think she was very happy either. So what about privacy, the privacy of our data?
Well, there's two aspects. There's a yin and a yang with privacy. One is that we are living in a society where privacy is becoming less important. The younger generation don't care as much about privacy. They are, you can see the young kids using social media,
TikTok.
posting and TikTok and everything. That, so they're an open book in respect to this. So part of it is a generational shift. I think a lot of the concerns is the older people like us worried about privacy, but in a world that's highly automated, then you need to give up certain data to be involved in this. But personalization comes from you giving up privacy. The fact that if you give certain data, like your DNA, should result in you living longer and living healthier lives, giving access to your DNA data. But we don't want everyone to have access to our DNA, and if insurers take your DNA and then price your insurance more expensive because you have certain conditions, this is where privacy is working against us, or personalization is working against us. But if an insurer was to say, you have potential for Parkinson's because it's in your genome, but if you do X, Y, and Z, and we will help you find these treatments, we can reduce the risk of Parkinson's in your older age by 90%. And so now you have to say, this requires a change in the way we think about business and the way we think about data. And if we use data in the old way, the way we have, then privacy is a concern. But if we think about new revolutionary ways to produce better experiences and better service for people, they won't be so concerned about giving up their privacy, because it's a trade. It's a currency. Your data and your information is tradable. And if you can trade that to get better service and better experience, I think most people will.
Okay, I want to touch upon another subject, AI bias. Now it turns out that these algorithms, since after all, they are built upon big data lakes that reflect human behavior. So if that human behavior was biased, for example, in recruiting, with prejudices, racial, gender prejudices, the resulting algorithm turns out to be prejudiced.
So this is where, when we're talking about algorithm and development of algorithms, particularly for these large service models and things like that, we really need to have some sort of ethical basis for building out artificial intelligence. Now, right now, it's completely commercially driven. We don't have regulation on AI except in China, really. The EU and the States are talking about it, but China is the only country in the world that has really AI regulation. If you're going to limit bias, you have to do so with policy, and you have to do so with sort of ethical constructs. The problem with that is, how do you get agreement on ethics so you can encode it from an AI? You know, if you look at the United States market and you take an issue of abortion, you're going to have a large-scale divide in terms of what the ethics of abortion should be. And so before we can ask AIs to eliminate bias, we have to eliminate bias from an ethical perspective. And this is a human factor problem. It's not an AI problem, it's a human problem. Now, we can eliminate bias by changing the way we feed those algorithms, but the data that we feed. But this requires, as I say, policy. So I think over the next 10, 20 years, we're going to see the development of significant policy and regulation on AI, and I think it's going to have to be globally focused. I don't think it makes sense to have AI regulation just in the US or just in China. I think AI regulation needs to be globally based, and I think we need to try and create some ethical frameworks that reflect that sort of global view. And there's going to be winners and losers in that. And very conservative governments like what we see in the US and the UK are probably going to be losers, because ultimately the increased march of technology makes us more progressive as a species.
Okay. Finally, Mr. Brett King, what do you think of events like this? Do they help create awareness, consideration, preparedness from the people working in the financial sector? Do we still have to go back to basics and relearn everything again?
Well, I've been doing this for 15 years, and it's only now that I'm starting to see people come to me at events and say, you were right, you were right, and starting to take the actions that we need. But that's natural, I'm a futurist. I'm always thinking 10, 20, 30 years out, and so I don't expect other people to see the world the same way as me. But when I'm writing my books or when I'm doing the speeches at these events, I'm trying to open people's eyes to new possibilities. And I think what's happened with the fintech market, the crypto space, what's happened during the pandemic, what's happening with digitization, the fact that all of the fastest growing financial institutions in the world today are, technology companies, essentially. People are starting to see this is not going to go away. Because when you're confronted with this sort of level of change, the first thing that incumbents do is they hope it disappears. They hope it stops so they can keep doing what they're doing. And when you have the realization this isn't going to stop, this is already happening, it's already happened in many places, then your only choice is to adapt or die, and that's essentially the cycle we're in. But events like this are important because what it gives is it gives people the opportunity to hear new messages, to think about the implications of that, and then they can ask questions, they can challenge that, because that's immediately the way we think. But, and so when we put those challenges forth and we have those challenges answered, it forces us to think differently. And so events like this are very important in getting that dialogue and helping people just to see the possibilities of the future.
After 5 years of coming to Rissmatics events, the first one was 2019 actually. What do you think of these events, these gatherings organized by Rissmatics?
It's always great for me to join the team. Alan and the team, I think of, and you guys have always put on great events. They seem to be growing in popularity. I'm very impressed by the level of participation that we're having at the events. So for me, as talent, as a speaker in the space, it's very useful and positive experience for me. I get a lot out of it, and I'm able to get reach into markets that I wouldn't normally get access to. So that's That's, I think, something that Riskmathics should be applauded for. They do bring in people from around the world to bring that different perspective to Latin America, and I think that really works. It helps open people's eyes up to what's happening outside of Mexico and Latam.
Well, let's leap into the future and hope that in 5 years, 10 years times, we're still here talking
hope so.
about the new trending.
I hope so.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Mr. King, thank you very much.
No problem.